Hey, everybody. I hope everybody's doing well. My name is Zandra, founder and owner of Finding Strength Through Trauma, LLC. As you know, we are a Christian life coaching business that offers tons of really cool Christian resources to help you on your journey with Christ. So, um, I pray that this message will give you new knowledge and wisdom and allow for some encouragement for you during whatever season you are in life right now. So, I want to share with you a scripture in the Bible in Luke, and it is in chapter 18, verse 1 through 8. And it's about the parable of the persistent widow. The main focus today is going to be for us to not ever stop praying, to be persistent. So, I want to give you an overview of the historical events in this particular time. So, you all know I always have my notes ready, so I'll be looking down and up. So, in this passage, Jesus tells a parable, okay? The parable was to teach his disciples that they should always pray and not give up. That's in Luke chapter 18, verse 1. So there was this widow who repeatedly came to an unjust judge, right? She kept asking him to grant her justice against her adversary. She's going through some things, right? The judge he didn't have any fear of God, nor he didn't even care about the people. So he ignored her at first. Then, because of her persistence, and because she can continue to return to him, he finally decided to give her justice. Uh, Not because he is righteous, um, just because he wants her to stop bothering him. So Jesus contrasts this unjust judge with God. If even an unrighteous judge responds to persistent pleas, that is, how much more will God, who is perfectly just and loving, respond to his chosen people who cry out to him day and night? Jesus concludes with this question: however, when the Son of Man comes, he will find faith on earth? So, the widow, let's talk about her, or just a widow in general. Widows were among the most vulnerable members of first century in Jewish society at that particular time. So, most depended on husbands and male relatives for financial support, for legal representation. Without either, many were left poor, powerless, and easy to be exploited. God repeatedly commanded his people to care for widows. In Deuteronomy chapter 10, verse 18, Psalm 68, verse 5, Isaiah 1, verse 17, and James chapter 1, verse 27. The widow likely had no advocate, right? No money to offer bribes, no social influence. Her only resource that she could use was her persistence. So let's talk about this judge. Jesus described this judge as one who neither feared God and he didn't care about the people. In Israel, judges were expected to reflect God's justice. Reference Deuteronomy chapter 16, verse 18 through 20. But this judge was corrupt, selfish, and indifferent. He ignored justice until persistence inconvenienced him. Let's talk a little bit about the court system at that time. Local disputes were often heard before village judges at that particular time. Corruption was not uncommon, and those with wealth or influence often received really good treatment. So the poor had to wait indefinitely. The widow had no status, no wealth, no influence, yet she refused to stop asking for justice. Again, she was persistent. So the reason that Jesus told this parable, guys, is because Luke reveals the purpose before the story even began. Jesus wanted his disciples to always pray and never give up. Reference Luke chapter 18, verse 1. The parable is an encouragement to remain steadfast in prayer, regardless of the delays. So the unjust judge was selfish. He was uncaring and reluctant. He wasn't moved by the Spirit. He was moved by his flesh. We should be able to discern the two. God is righteous, right? He's compassionate, loving, attentive, and faithful. So Jesus pointed that God is like the judge. So, but he was infinitely better. Okay. So if an unjust judge eventually responds, how much more will our Father answer his children? This kind of reminds me of something that I experienced before. And it kind of threw me back just a minute ago, but I want to share this with you. I remember there was a time, and I've mentioned this before, but it was a time when I was in a very verbally abusive relationship. It was really, really toxic. And he would always say that he didn't love me, didn't really care about me. But sometimes he would do nice things for me. But he never really showed love, if that makes sense. I had to learn how to discern the two. Sometimes people will just do things just because. It doesn't mean that they truly had a good heart in it. Sometimes people do things to do things and you can't really understand or explain it. But just like this judge, he was unjust. He really didn't care, but he just did it anyway, right? So it kind of reminded me of remembering that I knew that just because this person may have done nice things did not mean that he was a super nice person. And I knew that I needed to continue to seek God for provisions and to be able to understand what it was for what it was, right? So I want to share that God's timing, Jesus says that God's people cried out to him day and night. Waiting does not mean God is absent. His timing is perfect. So when he had or whenever he does appoint the time, he acts swiftly and wisely. Waiting often develops faith, perseverance, dependence, and spiritual maturity. I want to give you a an example, a modern day example of this parable. So let's say, for instance, a mother is praying for her child. Okay. So a mother who has an adult son walked away from God. He's making all kinds of destructive choices, struggling with addiction, refuses to listen to her advice. Every day she prays for his protection, salvation, and restoration. But months turn into years, right? She wonders if God hears her. Even so, she continues to pray because she trusts God's character rather than her circumstances. Eventually, her son experiences a turning point in his life, surrendering finally his life to Christ, and begins walking with God. Looking back, she realizes that God was working the entire time behind the scenes, both in her son's life and in her own heart. So, what this illustrates is that, like the persistence of the widow, she refused to give up. She believed in restoration. She believed it was possible and trusted that God was listening. She may not have seen it right away, but she trusted that God was listening. Unlike the unjust judge, and unlike a person that just does things just to do things with really not a spiritual heart at it, God was never ignoring her. He answered according to his perfect wisdom and his perfect timing. So another example could be praying for employment. A man loses their job, a woman loses their job. They faithfully apply for many other positions, but receive rejection after rejection. But instead of giving up, she continues praying, updating resumes, networking, developing new skills. Months later, God opens an opportunity, opens up a door for them. A position that's even better than the positions that they had been applying for before. Fit better than the one they even lost. They realized that God's apparent delay was actually preparation. God's delay is often preparation. He's getting us seasoned up, right? Getting us ready to receive the blessing. A lot of times we may pray for loved ones that they will have a healing or a restoration of relationships, financial provisions, freedom from strongholds, new wisdoms, new knowledge, new understandings, new direction. But in Luke 18, chapter 18, verse 1 through 8, teaches that persistence prayer is not about convincing God to care, because we know he already does. But it's having that persistent prayer to help strengthen our faith that keeps us close to him. And it reminds us that his timing is always perfect, guys. So the widow's persistence was not meant to show that God is reluctant. It was meant to encourage believers to keep praying with faith, because our loving Father hears every prayer and will act accordingly to his perfect timing. I want to share one last little bits on some key lessons that we've just learned in this really brief study. That we are to pray persistently. It demonstrates our faith our dependence and our trust in God's timing. God is unlike that unjust judge or that person that truly really doesn't really care. He responds from a place of love, justice, and compassion rather than being annoyed by our needs, by our prayer. God's timing is perfect. Even though we may think he's late, he's always on time. Waiting can feel super long, uncomfortable, but his answers comes according to his wisdom. So faith is revealed through perseverance, right? Genuine faith continues to trust and pray even when answers seem delayed. Perseverance is moving through anyway. No matter how it feels or what it looks like, you're continuing to keep going without giving up. Prayer is an act of faith. Prayer declares our confidence that God hears us and that he cares about us. So persistence really isn't about convincing God, but it's about shaping our hearts to continue to trust him. And God is never indifferent. We don't serve an indifferent God. He delights in hearing from his children. He wants to hear from us. It doesn't matter what he already knows about us. It doesn't matter what he knows that what we're gonna speak before we speak it. It doesn't matter that he already knows what we feel. But he wants to hear from us. Waiting has purpose that we may not always understand. That is why the scripture says to lean not on our own understanding. So there is some transformation that can come in our waiting season. Faith keeps prayers lifted, right? And our faith keeps us praying even when we cannot see the answer, when we can't see the outcome. So I want to give you all some practical applications with this. Keep praying even when the answers seem delayed. Trust in God's character rather than your own circumstances. Let persistent prayer strengthen your faith rather than weaken it. Don't get discouraged. Believe that God will answer according to his wisdom and perfect timing. We serve an on-time God. Remember that persistence, prayer, is less about changing God. We can't change God. It's mind. But it's more about strengthening the way that we trust him and the way that we'll wait for him. So is there a situation where you have become discouraged in prayer? If you feel led to share in the comments, please do. Are you trusting God's character while you wait? Sometimes we got to remind ourselves and we got to keep reading to learn God's character. I don't think we even understand how good God is. We think he holds anger and we forget the way and how he forgives. But we also need to remember that persistent prayer is less about we can't let the enemy make us think all these negative things. It's about being persistent in prayer, trusting all the things that God can do and that he will do. So another question could be, what might God be developing in you during this waiting season? How can persistent prayer for you deepen your faith instead of it being like repetitive, but how can it strengthen the faith that he wants us to have. So I want to share the main takeaway of this teaching is that this chapter reminds believers that God is not reluctant to hear us. He invites us to come to him continually. Persistent prayer is not about persuading an unwilling God, because our God is willing and able, but it's about cultivating a steadfast faith in our beautiful God, who is always just, who is always loving, who is always faithful, who's always attentive. The final question that we could challenge ourselves with is, this is powerful. When Christ returns, will he find people who continue to trust him through persistent prayer? We got to build our prayer up. We got to build our prayer life up and our faith up. And we only need a teensy bit of faith. But sometimes our circumstances could make it hard for us to have even that mustard seed of faith. But we have to rebuke the negative thoughts, right? So I hope that this message ministered to you all. I'm so grateful to be in this space, to be able to share the gospel. If you are in need of prayer or in any other kind of Christian resource, please click the link in our bio and tap in. If you're not already subscribed to our channel, I encourage you to subscribe, share this with anyone you know that needs to be encouraged today. I love each and every one of you all, and I'm so grateful for all of you all's support. I'm so grateful that you are here. I don't know. God is just so good. It really is. So I pray this message really ministered to you and poured in some new knowledge into your spirit, because everything that the Lord gives me is spirit-filled and spirit-led, for sure. Sorry for I've got a background picture, so it kind of makes me pop in and out. I'm not doing no editing. Y'all get me real raw and uncut. So I love you all. Hope you all have a beautiful day.